Welcome, everybody. 20 viewers waiting. That's awesome. Click refresh if you don't see it live. Put that in the chat because you probably didn't hear me say that if you don't see it live. Welcome, everybody. Wow, we already have a lot of messages. Okay, Steve's making coffee. Good morning, Steve. It's going to be a little bit more like reassess your chess than how to play like a grandmaster, but we're going to focus on mostly evaluating the position and then just a little bit on what sort of plans you want to make based on that evaluation. Good morning, Guillermo from San Antonio. Steve from Reno, Nevada. Data Driven Doug. That's a great username. Howdy from Chicopee, Massachusetts. Clem from Ireland. Dennis from Rochester, Minnesota. Home of the world's #1 hospital. Ian's here from Cayman Islands. Welcome. We have Hamlin, Hammocks. Hammocks, welcome from Sweden. Awesome. Jackie from St. Louis. Toby F is back from Norway. Welcome, Tanyu. Thomas from Germany. Zelda's here today. Alberto from Kentucky. Waldez from Czechia. Can't even say it. Czechia. Zelda's logging in from Cape G, Missouri. I knew it's night there. You're the only one awake. Thanks for watching. Alexandru from Romania. Hey, Ryan, welcome. Welcome, Ganbear. Norway Nyan is from Tokyo. But Norway is in the username. Wow. Okay, so we got a lot of people here. Let's get started right away. What we're going to do today is we're going to go over some of the content that's coming out in the next ChessGoals kind of large course that I've been working on. It's going to be an intermediate strategy and planning course. And this kind of goes along with some of the other courses I've been working on recently where I'm trying to tackle how to solve the top challenges that you guys have as chess improvers. So I'll kind of go through the list quick just because it gets a little hard to follow in the emails. But let me recap the top 12 chess challenges that adult improvers have. So this is based on a survey of about 155 people. Number 12 is the mental and psychology aspect of the game. Number 11 is clock management. Number 10 is converting advantages, which we made a course on. Number 9 is practical endgame play. Number 8 is focusing on your opening repertoire. Number 7 is calculation and visualization. Number 6 is staying motivated with chess. Number 5 is what we did a live class on last week, rating plateaus and improvement. So what do you do when you're stuck at a rating? And we surveyed the audience. Every single person has had a rating plateau. Every single one. So you're not alone. And now we reach number 4. So this is number 4 on the top 12 chess challenges, middle game strategy and planning. And I think if you sort of focus on, let's just say, players below 1400, I think it's more likely that you're going to see people say they struggle with blunders. But above 1400, I would say it's probably more about what do we do once we get out of the opening phase. Well, we got the dog cam going now. Memphis in the background. So once you're above a certain rating, it becomes more about how do you figure out which move to make next and not so much about, oh, I just made this silly blunder. Yeah, Zelda says doggy. Okay, so we're on number 4, middle game strategy and planning. And this is going to be similar to reassess your chess from Silman. This is something that I want to recommend for intermediates to advanced players to help them get to the next level. How do we figure out the best chess moves in any position? I'll just go through the top 3 as well. Number 3 for the top 12 challenges, study habits and motivation. Number 2 is having limited time. And number 1 is blunders. So that's kind of across all ratings, and I think that's why you see blunders at number 1. All right. So we're going to start out doing something a little bit different today. We're going to kick into a bit of movie time. So this comes directly from the course, Middle Game Planning and Strategy course. We're just going to watch this clip together, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so here we go. Let me know in the chat if for some reason, Memphis, get off the bed now. If for some reason you can't see or hear it, let me know in the chat. But we'll just play through this and then we'll talk about it. Let's talk about evaluating positions in chess. Evaluating positions is actually one of my favorite things to do in chess. I think it's very interesting to look at the different imbalances and figure out how does the computer rate the position, because the computer is getting closer and closer to sort of the gold standard. Is a position winning, drawn, losing? But the eval gives us a sense of what's sort of the percentage chance that we win this game or draw this game or lose this game. So this chapter, we're diving into evaluating the position. So before you come up with a plan, you must first evaluate. And that's why evaluation is so important. So if you think of a position as sort of like a tree with different nodes or branches going down the variations, you want to go down each variation. And then at the end of the variation, when you kind of reach a steady calm point, assign an evaluation to that position. And then what you can do is after you have all of these bottom nodes, you can compare them in your mind. And I know it sounds like a lot, but the more and more you practice this, the easier it gets. So sometimes you might go down a variation, say this middle one. You reach the dead end, and this is just a bad position for you. You can just scrap that. You can eliminate it, right? So there's shortcuts. You don't have to remember 10 different positions and have an evaluation attached to each. You can toss things out, weed things out quickly as you go. But then eventually you want to have a few end positions, and in your mind, think of a way to rank them. Now for me, I can think of positions in terms of evaluation numbers. So I might think, oh, this is about a 0.2 or a 0.4 for white, or maybe it's a 0.3 for black. And that's because I've done so much analysis with Stockfish that I'm used to having those numbers. But you could also think in terms of just, is this position a little bit better for me? Do I like it better? Do I like it a lot better? Do I like it worse? Is their position better? So just come up with a system in your mind that you can rank the positions. And then once you have the evaluation down, that's going to help you find the correct plan. So evaluate before planning. A plan based on a wrong eval is likely to fail, right? So if we go down a branch and we give it an eval that we think we're much better, but we actually just completely miss something and the other side is better, or we don't understand the position, we may choose that position, that line, that variation that's actually suboptimal because we just didn't come up with a good eval in the end. You need to know your advantages and your weaknesses in the position. So that's going to help you build the eval, and we're going to talk more about that coming up. And the positional features are going to guide you not only where to play, what areas of the board, but what to play. That's going to help you figure out the specific move orders and sequences in the position. So I have a note down below here. Imagine launching a queenside attack while you're getting checkmated on the king side, right? So you want to be able to really figure out, how do I balance all the different things in the position? Now, here are the main 5 evaluation factors, and there are more than these, but some of them are very nuanced and complicated. Or even to the point of being like strengths and weaknesses of my opponent or psychological factors. But these are the 5 big ones. These are what I want you guys to focus on. Material, king safety, piece activity, space, and pawn structure. So material is just the pieces on the board. That's the simple rook equals 5, bishop equals 3, knight equals 2, and so on. King safety, that's how much protection does your king have and how much protection does your opponent's king have. One of the kings is almost always going to be safer than the other. Sometimes you might just say, well, both are completely safe or both are really exposed, but that's a huge factor. And actually at the intermediate and beginner levels, king safety determines a lot of outcomes. I've reviewed quite a few games for the move-by-move beginner and intermediate, early intermediate courses. King safety, I think, is one of the biggest evaluation factors that determines the result of a game. So outside of just kind of what's the blunder rate of each player, king safety is huge. Piece activity, You want your pieces to control a lot of squares. You want your opponent's pieces to not have good options, right? You want your knights to have outposts. You want your opponent's knights to just be stuck, not have any routes going forward. And then space. Space is the amount of room you have behind your own pawns typically. So you kind of want to create a position where you have the space to maneuver around, and that's going to work with your piece activity, and that's going to allow you to create weaknesses in the opponent's camp or attack the opponent's king, executing your plans. Without much space, it's hard to find good plans because your pieces just get kind of cramped in the back ranks. And then number 5, pawn structure. There's a bunch of things to think about here. Pawn chains, doubled pawns, isolated pawns, backward pawns, hanging pawns. We're going to go more into those. So those are the 5 big ones, and they're going to show you where to focus your efforts. You'll also want to look at strengths and weaknesses in a given position. So here are some examples of strengths. Active bishop on a long diagonal. That bishop has a lot of long-range potential, long-term potential. A rook on an open file, right? We know rooks dominate on an open file. That's much better than having a passive rook sitting behind a pawn of your own color. Knights on an outpost. And the further advanced that outpost is up the board towards your opponent's side, the stronger that knight's going to be as well. And then control of the center is another good example. If you control the center, you tend to control the game. That's going to be in your favor going forward. Some examples of weaknesses. An isolated D pawn. Sometimes it's called isolated queen pawn. Weak dark squares around a king. This could be your own king, the opponent's king. You want to kind of keep aware of not only is the king safe, but how do I get to the king, right? Is there a fianchettoed bishop in front of that king? If that gets traded off, all of a sudden there's additional weak squares around the king. King stuck in the center. This is a big one, especially for beginners and early intermediates. You need to get your king to safety by getting castled. You almost always want to castle. So having your king stuck in the center can lead to very quick losses, either in the opening or in the early middle game. Another example is a cramped queen side. Maybe for some reason you just didn't get your pieces developed on the queen side. Your opponent's pawns came at you on the queen side, and all of a sudden you can't get those pieces out. Your rook's trapped on A1, and you end up losing the game because your queen side was cramped. So every position contains clues for what you should do next, and you're going to use those strengths and weaknesses to find the clues. Okay, evaluation guides the plan. So here are some examples. Active pieces. If your pieces are active and they're more active than your opponent's, look for tactical chances or ways to attack the opponent. So if they're sitting back passive, you should look to play more active. A good example of this is I used to work with a student who was a very process-driven improver, an adult improver, and one thing that he liked to do was focus on his blunder rate. He would keep spreadsheets and see what percentage of the time is he blundering, and his way to improve was to just minimize the blunders as much as possible. What ended up happening was he was playing passive. He would keep all of his pieces back to make sure that he didn't move something out where it could be targeted, but then the problem was his pieces were not active. His opponent was able to create the initiative or create an attack with the active pieces. So that's a great example of, you have active pieces, try to punish your opponent, try to create some chances. Another example is if you have a weak pawn on the board. If you have the weak pawn, try to fix it. If your opponent has the weak pawn, maybe you try to target it. You surround it first. Classic example is isolated queen pawn. It can be a strength in terms of gaining space and attacking, but it can also be a weakness in terms of a pawn that can't be protected by another pawn. Bad bishop. I love the bad bishop example. If I can give my opponent a bad bishop, especially against a good knight, that's an imbalance that I will play for all day long. I will go out of my way to create that imbalance. So if you see a bad bishop, if it's your own, try to improve it or trade it off. If it's your opponent's, try to keep it a bad bishop the rest of the game and utilize that in your planning. Safe king plus additional space. So if your own king is safe and you have space, that could be a cue that maybe you should launch an attack. Try to go after your opponent's king. And on the flip side, if you have a weak king, focus on defense and try to simplify. Trade off the opponent's potential attackers or the pieces that are already attacking you. So these are all things that you can think about that are factors in evaluating the position that can also guide your plan. So each feature here suggests actions. You don't want to invent a plan, right? You're not just coming up with a completely random plan. It's not like shaking a magic 8 ball and it just gives you a plan. You need to discover the plan. You're discovering the plan based on these features in the position. All right, let's practice. Enough of the slides. In the next chapter, we're going to go through some examples, and I want you guys to think about the following. Who stands better in each position? What are the positional factors that support or lead you to that evaluation? And also, what kind of plan might each side consider? So we're going to talk through a bunch of examples. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you in the next chapter. All right, that's the end. What did you guys think? Any questions on that video? So we're going to go through examples. I have at least 5 examples that we can go through today. Okay, Jackie's saying, I already like the course. Nice. Great video. Nice. Very clear. Okay, question regarding the evaluation nodes in the tree. If I understand it right, to evaluate the position in each node after your opponent's move. Yes. So essentially, if you're playing, let's say, a classical game, then you have plenty of time to do this. But essentially, after each move that your opponent makes, the position changes a little bit. And even if they made a move that you maybe predicted, you still want to kind of go back and make sure that your analysis is accurate. So if you have the time to do it, kind of go through every single move and look at all the options again and just verify what you had looked at. Okay, good. Some nice comments in the chat. All right, are we ready for some examples? Let me switch to the new slide. Here we go. Okay. So this is position number 1. In the course, this is going to be position number 4. What we want to do here is look at these factors above my head. These are the 5 main factors. So like I talked about in that video, there are a bunch of other factors. I mean, you could probably think of 20 different factors, I would say, that could kind of all play into how to evaluate a position and how to create a plan. But this is probably the 80-20 principle, I would say. Like, these are the 5 factors that are really going to get you most of the way there. So first, let's talk about material. And I want you guys in the chat to put evaluation numbers. So for material, it's always going to be a whole number. So what's the material count here? Put it in the chat. So it could be 0, +1, -1. This is kind of a simple one to get us going. And we won't go through all of these in each example, but I want to start at this like very basic level to get you guys on the right path. Okay, good. 0, 0, 0. So the material is equal. That's our starting point. If white were up a pawn, our starting point would be +1. And then we're going to go from there to create the eval. Okay, now let's look at king safety. So for king safety, oh yeah, good idea. So in the chat, you guys are putting like material equals 0. Do something like that so we know which one you're talking about, like KS equals whatever, or say king safety equals whatever. So for king safety now, there are different ways you can do this. You could create a scale where you think like +1, 2, 3, or 4. But let's just think of it in terms of stockfish eval, which is kind of the equivalent of like how many pawns worth of material. So let's think of it in those terms. For me, one of the easiest ways to do this is to sort of think in terms of quarter pawns. So which king is safer in terms of quarter pawns? Like, is it 0.25 for white? Is it 0.5 for black, which would be -0.5? Put your answer in the chat. What's the king safety eval? Okay, Steve is saying king safety plus 0.25. Thomas says the same. Zelda says 0.5. Frank 0.5. Toby F +1. Aditya 0.25. Black is short the G pawn 0.5. Equal 0.5 white, 0.5 white, 0.5, 0.5. Very good. Okay, so the answer that I had in my notes is 0.5 for white. So why is it 0.5? Okay, this king on g1, it does have the h2 pawn, g2 bishop, g3 pawn, and some major pieces nearby to help it out. So that king is only slightly weak, and that's because you see this diagonal pointing to the king, but there are no diagonal pieces for black that can easily get to that diagonal. So it's not really a huge factor. This knight is sort of hovering around the white king. You know, we see that it targets these two squares, f2, h2, a bit close to our king, a little bit uncomfortable. But is there a way for another black piece to attack the king? Not immediately, right? You would almost need to have this queen hovering out here, something else trying to help out the knight. So white king, fairly safe. The black king, though, you can tell right off the bat that that king is in a little bit of danger. He's out in the open. There's no g-pawn for black. The f-pawn's extended up. There's this diagonal open to the king. This rook might infiltrate. So the black king is weaker. Now, it is hard to say exactly why you picked 0.5, but I think the more you practice with these positions, the more you'll start to get a feel for it. We're essentially saying that black king's weakness compared to the white king is worth about half a pawn. Like, we would give up half a pawn as white to get that king in this position compared to ours. Okay, now let's go on to piece activity. Okay, put your answers in the chat. Piece activity, what's the eval here? And you guys nailed it on the first two, so this is good so far. Piece activity. So piece activity, I think the easiest way to think about that is just sort of how many squares can each piece get to easily. But then also I think you want to weight the better squares more heavily. So if your pieces are able to, let's say, get at the opponent's king or get into the opponent's camp or attack weaknesses, that's a little bit more valuable, for example, than a rook that can just move all around the back rank. Okay, piece activity, we're seeing +2, +0.5, -0.5, +2, 0.25, +1, 0.5, 1, 1. Zelda says, hard to say. White's king is more active, but the bishop is kind of stuck. 1.5. Tony says the knight feels stronger than the bishop, but the rook on a8 is sad. 0.25, 0.75, 0.5, +1. 1.0, 1.0, 0.5. Yeah, this is good. So I think you guys are averaging, just doing rough math in my head, I feel like you're averaging around a +1 for piece activity. And that's right in the ballpark with what I was thinking as well. One thing I will say, evaluating these positions and trying to match Stockfish exactly is kind of like an abstract art. I mean, it's not a perfect scientific method. There's so much that goes into the Stockfish eval. But as long as you are able to compare your different node evaluations to each other, it doesn't matter so much that the number itself is correct. We just want to get in the right ballpark. One thing that I was thinking about in preparation for this class is how many different categories of eval actually matter in a human versus human game. And I would say for you guys, either picking 5 or 7 categories. So if you did a 7 category method, I think your categories would be equal, white is slightly better, white is clearly better, and white is winning. And then on the other side, you have black slightly better, black clearly better, black is winning. So that'd be 7 categories. And those categories match like the old school chess evaluation terms, right? You see it equal, plus over minus, plus next to minus, and then the flip side for black. That's 7 categories. And if you think about those 7 categories, where does thinking about like the Stockfish eval actually matter? It's probably just in those middle 5. Once you're in the white is winning or black is winning territory, then it becomes a, how do we convert the advantage as simply as possible? Or how do we make this position as difficult as possible or as messy as possible so that our opponent cannot easily convert the advantage? So once you're in those top and bottom categories of the 7, I would say toss out the stockfish eval, unless you're trying to figure out like what's the quickest route to win and it's already completely winning. You want to just think about practical chances at that point. How do I just simplify this win, or how do I make the win really difficult for the opponent? But in those middle 5, that's where the eval matters, because you want to take that slight advantage to a clear advantage, or to the winning category, or you want to get back to the equal category. And then if you wanted to make it just 5 levels, I would say eliminate the difference between slight and clear advantage for each side. So it would just be equal, one side's better, or one side's winning. That's the 5 categories. Okay, so a bit of a tangent. Back to the position. Piece activity, I was putting in the notes around a 1.5, but I think the 1.0 is pretty accurate. We do have this strong knight for black. The white rooks, to me, are clearly better. That rook on a8 is a bad piece. And this rook on f7 looks clumsy, whereas the white rooks, especially the one on e1, it's already trying to come into black's position. I think the queen is a lot better for white than the black queen, right? This queen already targets a pawn. She's ready to get on this diagonal. And I think, like Zelda said, this bishop is a little bit weak. So if you kind of compare all of the pieces, though, I would say the white pieces are quite a bit stronger because black only has one good piece. And if you combine it with the targets, so we have this pawn as a target, this pawn as a target, I think you need to up it a little bit for white. So 1.0, I mean, looking at it now, I think I kind of agree with you guys. 1.0 is a pretty good eval, but I think 1.5 is also pretty accurate. Another thing you'll notice with stockfish is quite often the stockfish eval will be somewhere between what you think and 2 times what you think, right? So we think in terms of material, but stockfish it calculates very deeply, and it really values all these positional factors highly, more so than sort of an old school chess player would, where we tended to focus mostly on material first. So that 1.5, I think I'm a little biased by modern engines. Like, they put a lot of weight into these other factors, but 1.0 is definitely a good answer. Okay, let's go on to space. What's our eval for space now? And I'll read the chat while you guys are answering this. One thing I struggled with is how to use that winning and not winning category. Yeah, so in terms of stockfish eval, the winning category for stockfish versus stockfish is around +2. For humans, though, you might be looking at even a +3 or more. But that's something you'll get a feel for. You know, in your mind, you want to think, should I win this game? Probably like 90% of the time or more. That would be the winning category, I would say. Okay, space, we got a +1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 5, 2. Great question by Colin. Do you have to be careful not to double count? Piece activity may be amplified by having targets. That's a really good question. I would say double counting is perfectly fine. And the reason I say that is, just like I mentioned, stockfish, if you have a bunch of these imbalances all in your favor, it's almost like an exponential advantage. Like if you have all 5 of these in your favor and each one's like a 0.25, it's probably not a 1.25 advantage. You're probably already completely winning because they just multiply each other. It really makes the position stronger. Okay, +1, 125, 0.5, 0.25, 1, 1, 0.75 to 1, 2, 1, 1. Good. Okay, so you guys are averaging like a 1 for white. I think that makes a lot of sense. In my notes, I lowered it for white. I put 0.25, but I think the 1 is actually pretty good. The reason I put 0.25 is because I felt like the queenside space advantage, if we just look over here, it's significant with the D pawn up. To me, that's white's space advantage. But you could also say, kind of going back to the double counting thing, that white is a space advantage on the E file with this pawn here, right? This rook is coming in. But the reason I've only put 0.25 is just because I only saw this one pawn as a space advantage. But I think somewhere in as long as you say white has a space advantage Somewhere in the 0.25 to 1 range, I think is pretty good. I wouldn't go any higher than 1 though. Okay, so what do we have so far? We had 0 for material, 0.5 king safety, and we're looking at about a 1 for the space. What was piece activity? What did we say for piece activity? 1. Okay, so we're at 2.5, I think. Does that right? Help me in the chat. I'll put what I think we had. Material 0. King safety 0.5. Piece activity 1. Space 1. I think that's what we had. Piece activity, I had 1.5. I think you guys averaged around 1. So we're at 2.5 so far. Okay, last one. Pawn structure. What do we think? So pawn structure, focus more on just like weak pawns. Isolated pawns, double pawns, backward pawns, those sort of things. Okay, I'm seeing a 1, 2.5. What else do we have? 1, 2, 1.25, 1, 1. Pawn structure, 0.5, Zelda's saying. 0.25. 0.5, 0.5. 1.5. I cannot do math this fast and I don't feel like typing them all in, but it feels like we're averaging around a 0.75, I would say. Somewhere around there, a little less than 1. So now if we add all these factors up, we had 0 for material, 0.5 king safety, 1 for piece activity, 1 for space, 0.75. We're looking at about a 3.25. If we look at the Stockfish answer now for the eval, or actually, let me ask you guys first. Okay, so now you know that all added to 325. Just now take a holistic look at the position and tell me, what does your gut tell you that the eval should be for this position? Put that answer in the chat now. So just what's your gut say? This is the eval. Curious to see what you guys think. Okay, we got a +3, +4, +2. Alan's saying there's an old book that adapted the point count bridge. Oh, okay. The point count from bridge for hands of cards to chess. Huh, interesting. Each one had a factor of 0.33. Okay, so we have 3, 4, 2, 1, 2, 5, +9, 3, 5, 1, 9, 2. Yeah, this is really good. Okay, so actually, Ryan, 3.458967, but I rounded up. That reminds me of this old video. It was like my friend played this game, WoW, and there was like a really famous video where the guy calculated like what are the odds of some attack working, and it was like 0.3333, repeating, of course. Okay, that's a tangent. You guys are spot on though. The eval here is 2.2 for white. So you can see like it's not perfect. You know, you may add up all the factors and they add up to 3.5 and the eval's 2.2. Or you might have added to 1.5 and the eval's 2.2. But we're right in the ballpark here. 2.2 is the eval. Okay, so based on this eval, what would you guys say is the plan for white? Put that answer in the chat. Yes, Leroy Jenkins. That's the video, Zelda. Thank you. And then he yells his name like, Leroy Jenkins, and charges in. I forgot the name of it. Yeah, my friend used to be so into WoW. We had a group of friends that played poker all the time, and he'd be too busy with like getting together with his friends playing WoW to play poker sometimes. Okay, so Toby's saying attack black's king, Thomas double on the E file. Yeah, so we're factoring in these weaknesses for black. The weaker king. We know that white had the strength of the more active rook. We know there's this backward E pawn for black. That's a weakness. Triple on the E file, advance kingside pawns, double or triple on the E file, pressure on E7. Don't exchange pieces, double rook on the E file, push the knight back. Yes, H3 is another really strong move. Let's get rid of, or not get rid of, but push back black's best piece. Alekine's gun. Oh, I like that too. So Alekine's gun is where you put the two rooks in the lead and then put the queen behind them. You could put all three pieces on the E file. Trade bishop for knight if possible. I agree with that. Yeah, that's actually a really good one too. So you could play bishop f3, for example, as a way to either kick this knight or just threaten to trade it off. Trade your bishop that's not a great piece, it's sort of trapped behind the pawns, or that strong knight. Perfect. Okay, here's a hard question. This is, I think, a harder question. What's the plan for black? So we know the eval. We know what white wants to do. What is the plan for black here? So for example, let's just give white a nothing move. What's the plan for black? And I think the answer to this question is maybe partially why my space eval was so low for white. There's a hint. So what should black do? Okay, Steve is saying breakthrough on the queen side. Tanya is saying b5, queen side activity. Clem says get the black queen into action. Pawn break on the queen side, activate the rook. Piece activity, mobilize the pieces. Double on the H file, prepare b5. Black to move, you got to activate the queen and consolidate the weaknesses. Queen d7, rook a to e8. So that would be a play in the center strategy. h5, h4, kingside attack. b5 is interesting. Force b5, attack on the a file. Good. You guys are all giving great answers here. So what black wants to do is black wants to make white's plan difficult. So here's what I would say. If you get a position like this, the first thing to think about is how quickly is white's attack coming? So we know white wants to really pile up on this e-pawn. And we could hunker down and play defense, right? We could play queen d7, rook a8. But I don't want to do that unless I absolutely have to do that. So if that's my only option, okay, I'll sit back and play defense here. But the first thing I want to look for after I realize that I don't have to do that immediately is how do I make this position messy? And I think the two ways to do that involve pawn breaks. I didn't really consider the h5, h4 break. I think it's interesting, but after h5, h3, this knight moves. It's possible that this becomes a bigger weakness than it helps us. But I think the b5 break is really what black needs to play for here. And this is why I didn't give white a huge space advantage, because I think probably I don't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I think I saw that black could play b5, and this gives black sort of a counter to the space advantage that white has in this area. So white's got a little bit of that center space. Black needs to play for this queenside play. Now let's just say white does a trade. A lot of players don't like pawn tension. You can start to see already how black is becoming more active in this position. Now we took that a8 rook, which was a terrible piece. He's coming back into the game. And maybe that rook can help out the knight here. And if the queen's able to sneak in, black can start getting some counterplay. So after those couple moves, the eval is still +1. But that's what I think black wants to go for in this position. Can they get that queenside play? Clem is saying, what about rook f6, rook h6? I think that's interesting. I do worry that white will play h3, but I think it's on the right track. You're trying to create some counterplay against white. All right, let's go on to the next position. This was really good, guys. Okay, position number 5. So what we're going to do in this one, to speed it up a little bit from the last one, put all 5 of your factors in the chat at the same time. So put like M colon, KS colon, put all 5 in here. So I'm going to give you guys a minute or so. Think through this position. Think through all the imbalances. This is a messy one. How would you weigh each of these factors? And then I'll go through what I have in the notes, and then we'll guess the final eval separately, and then look at what the answer is. I actually find guess the eval like one of the most interesting things in chess because it really highlights how complicated positions can be. White to move, yes. Good question. White to move. Okay, Adich is saying material +1. Material is actually equal. Same number of pawns. It's a weird pawn structure, but it's equal right now. So our base, I'm giving you the answer for number 1. That's the easy one. Our base should be 0 for equal material. It is, if you have a method where you want to base material on a couple other factors, and you want to say like white's +1 in material here because of some other factors that you put into your material calculation, that's fine. Like you could say, for example, bishop pair is 0.5 and put that into your material calculation. Or you could say, you know, black's knight doesn't do anything, you know, but for this, let's keep material as just what's the pure material. I think that'll be simplest. Okay, Sadat is saying -0.8. I know this is a lot to type out. I'll tell you what I'm thinking while you guys are typing your answers. I'm thinking material equal. That's kind of an easy one. King safety. I look at the black king. I see that it's in the center. And I see that there are no pawns on the 7th rank at all. And in particular, on the king side where that king wants to head to. And the white king looks pretty cozy here. The only downside of the white king position is half open G file. So I gave white a 0.75 for king safety. Piece activity, I did a 0.25 for white. You know, I think it's hard to evaluate, but I would say this bishop is pretty bad. It's got to come out this way. This knight is pretty bad. This bishop is pretty bad, but I think this knight is decent. I think the queen already has some activity, and this knight is bad. So it's like, okay, one good bishop for black, one good knight for white, and the queen slightly better for white. The rooks aren't really doing anything at this point. So it's close to equal, but I did 0.25. Space, I did equal. I see black has 1 pawn on our 5th rank, but it doesn't seem to give any sort of advantages due to space. Pawn structure. Both sides have a pretty ugly pawn structure again. I gave a 0.25, or actually I did a -0.25. Okay, I remember why. -0.25 because this is a protected pass pawn. So even though black has isolated pawn, backward pawn, protected pass pawns are really valuable. Pass pawns are also valuable, like this is a pass pawn. But I gave black just a real slight advantage with a -0.25. Zelda said I gave a -3 to both sides for pawn structure. Okay, we need to have someone in charge of the chat who can average these values for us. Do we have any like math wizards that can just look at all the numbers and give an average? Can someone put what the average is for everyone so far? It looks like, okay, everyone's got material 0. King safety, it looks like the average is about a +1. Piece activity. Okay, Zelda's doing it. We got Zelda on the task. Zelda, can you do this for the next positions as well? Glad we have Zelda doing it. I mean, the thing that I agree with you guys in this position is a lot of these factors are close to zero, and the position is extremely messy. So those are things that we have to think about. Matt says, aren't you the stats guy? It's the weekend, Matt. That's the thing. You can only do so many stats throughout the week. Julius, welcome from India. Awesome. Ryan says, I've never had an eval lesson broken down like this. You know, I think at first this may look complicated, right? We're going through a lot of numbers and you'll be thinking, how do I possibly go through a position and go down all these nodes and give every one of these positions an eval when each eval has 5 factors? But it's just like anything in life. The more you do this, the more intuitive it just becomes. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but I've looked at so many positions over decades with computers, you know, since the late 90s. I can look at a position and pretty quickly get in the ballpark of what the eval is without spending a lot of time on it. So the more time that you spend doing this process, the quicker and quicker it becomes. And at a certain point, you don't really think through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You just look at a position and say, oh, white's better here, and it's because of this pawn and this king position, and this is my plan because of that. Like you look at Magnus Carlsen, he can play instant moves that are extremely, extremely strong. It's just because his brain is processing the position that quickly, and so much of it is pattern recognition and just reps over and over and over. Okay, Zelda is saying the average is skewing towards white. We're looking at a 0.75 to 0.5, or sorry, 0.75 plus or minus 0.5 for white. Oh, nice. Steve copied all the chat numbers into ChatGPT. Great usage, assuming it knows how to do it. And the average is 0.08. Yeah, position is really scattered. Okay, so this might surprise you guys. The eval is minus 0.9. And I think the reason it's a minus 0.9 is even though the position looks ugly for both sides, I think it's the combination of this passed pawn. And one thing we didn't really talk about is the bishop pair. You know, the computer loves the bishop pair. That passed pawn is going to be there forever. And it's kind of a thorn in white's side. And the black king, even though it's stuck in the middle, the center is all locked up. So the king is actually fairly safe for black, and maybe black can get a little G-file pressure. You know, I'm just trying to fit a narrative to the eval, you know, kind of like the stock market dropped today. Let's just make some story as to why versus predicting that it's going to drop. But I think these are kind of the factors that lead to that minus 0.9 eval for black. Bishop pair emoji. Nice. Okay, so what is the plan for white? Put those answers in the chat. What do you think the plan is for white here? So now we've talked about all the factors. What does white want to do? And now we know that white is worse. You know, sometimes that can help us figure out a plan too. So if white is worse, we probably don't want to sit back and just do nothing. Try to think about what should white do in this position. Ryan is saying, Matt, prior question, how often should we stop to do this eval in a classical game? I think, Ryan, this is something that you want to constantly have an idea of what the eval is. So throughout a whole classical game, and this is a really good question, because I've talked to some players about this, and they will say, it's actually a difference I've found between like experts and masters versus club players. Club players will tell me, oh, I don't really ever think about the eval of the position. Whereas the expert or master will say, I constantly have an awareness of what the eval is, because they're going to change how they play based on the eval. I think of the eval as like a scoreboard in sports, right? If you're playing an NFL football game and you're up big, you're going to call different plays, right? You might just play prevent defense or whatever it is. If you're down, you might take more risks. It's the same in chess. So eval is not just simply who's up or down points of material. I think that's how club players tend to think about it. But eval is all of these factors together. Okay, so what are the plans that we have? Knight a4 to c5. Okay, trying to improve the knight. Praying, nice. Knight h2, bringing around to e3. Okay, so we're trying to improve our pieces here. Get the bishop on c1 over to h4 is one suggestion. Attack queenside. Let's see, what else? Move the king, tuck the king over to h1 where he's safer. Put the rook on f2, bring the knight to e3. Yeah, so you guys really like that e3 square for the knight. I think that's good. One thing you could do, which is not intuitive, but I'm kind of looking at the Stockfish lines, you could tuck the bishop on e3. It actually likes this as the best first move. And this is more of an advanced concept, I would say, but essentially you're saying, okay, we're going to allow that bishop to just look like a pawn. We're going to allow that bishop to be a terrible looking piece. But the reason we're doing that is because we want the bishop to secure our two pawns on d4 and f4, especially the f4 pawn. The bishop is cozy here. It can't easily be attacked by black's knight. No other black pieces are coming after it. And now in this position, let's improve our pieces. So this is where, for example, you could play queen b3. That queen's going to target the e pawn. Rook f to c1. Put your rook on the c pawn. Reroute this knight through f1. Bring it to d2. Bring it out to c4. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to make that bishop a terrible piece. We're going to essentially sacrifice the mobility of that bishop to improve all of our other pieces. That's what Stockfish wants to do for white. And you want to play active. You need to create some threats in black's position so that you can fight back from the worst eval, right? White doesn't want to sit back and play nothing. Okay, now let's go to this position. Let's give white just a passive move. I'm trying to think what a good example would even be. We'll give white king h1. Okay, what is the plan for black now? What does black want to do here? Your board looks like those Hikaru memes right now. Yeah, so just draw a bunch of arrows. Yeah, I agree. How interesting it would be if the players could also see the eval bar while playing the games, except indicating how many moves till mate. That would be extremely interesting. Yeah. I mean, for super GMs, that gives them so much information if they were able to see an eval bar. I think it takes away one of the skills in chess, being able to evaluate those positions. Okay, queen a5 or bishop a6. So get on one of these diagonals I'm seeing. Rook to g8. Yep, bishop a6 is the number 2 move in this position. Attack along the g file, activate the pieces, target white's weak pawns. Queen f6, rook g8. Yep, another move that Stockfish really likes here. It's the top suggestion in the position is queen h4. But essentially the bishop is going to a6 in every line. So that makes sense. Get the bishop on this diagonal, pokes at the rook, gets more active. Let's get the queen active, whether it's coming out to h4 or the queen side. Put the rook on g8. And in one of the lines, Stockfish is even saying, you could tuck your king on e7. If you want to connect the rooks that way, because we just moved everything else off the 8th rank, you could do that. So that's black's plan. Look to improve all the pieces, kind of the same as white, and look to play for the initiative. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about in that intro video that we looked at. In the student who played passive to avoid blunders. You always want to play actively. You always want to make your pieces more mobile, target your opponent's threats, try to create problems, because it's almost impossible for them to play perfect defense. It's much more difficult to defend all the threats than it is to create the threats. All right, so that was a minus 0.9, I think the answer was. We got it wrong, but that's okay. It was a super messy position. I shouldn't say wrong. We were off in the sense that we had white with the advantage and it was actually black. but it was a messy position. Okay, let's go to the next one. Position number 6. Okay, now for this one, let's even make it a little bit more simplified. But what your eval guess is, and then with a little bit of text, just say why. This is kind of going to that like advanced player type analysis, right? Like you don't necessarily look at each one by one, but just give me your summary. What's the eval here? And what's like a 1 or 2 sentence summary as to why? Thanks for watching, Ryan. He's going to play some OTB. Awesome. Colin is saying if you play the I don't know how to pronounce it, Noctai or Noctai bots, the eval of each move is shown, so not the positions. Quite good for training. Okay, Clem is saying 1.8. Steve 125. Waldez 1. Toby F 1.5. Looks like more space for the white answers. Okay. More active pieces. Dennis says Knight Outpost 1.5. Yep, so the Knight Outpost is right here. And this is a position where if you play like the Caro-Kann or the Slav, you get into some of these positions from the black side where white gets the advanced pawn on d4 and black has these pawns on e6 and c6. And usually black is trying to go for a break. Like you want to push your e or c pawns up. Audio dead, is that true? On OBS, it looks like the audio is still working. Okay, Toby's saying audio good. Zelda audio, I can hear you. Okay. Maybe refresh if it sounds muted. Okay, slight advantage with the space and pressure on f7. Black does not want to play f6 because it weakens e6. White's got the pawn chain, the active knight, 0.5. Yep. Okay, Zelda, what's the average? Or ChatGPT, what's the average? Yeah, f6, even though it's tempting to play f6, it does open g6 and it weakens e6. Ian saying 0.5. So I don't think anyone has said advantage for black, which is interesting. And I think that, shows just from experience, all of our experience playing against humans, it's much easier to be the side that has more space with the knight outpost than the side that's sitting back playing passively. But the eval, I think, will surprise you guys a little bit. It's 0.03. So Stockfish is saying this position is completely equal. Zelda says average is somewhere around 1.1 to 1.25 for white. And okay, I feel bad. One thing I didn't mention, it's black to move. Let me just give black a random move and see what the eval is. 0.25 for white. Okay, so not huge. It is black to move here. I should have mentioned that. The computer says black can play knight back to f6. And then black is going to play knight d7, trade off this knight. So that's the plan. And I think the problem for white here is there's no clear way to increase this advantage. So even though I agree with you guys, like the static eval and the start position favors white. Static meaning just a snapshot of this. Don't go down your different nodes. But this is where the value of kind of going down those different nodes comes into play. If you had this position in a classical OTB game, and let's just say black plays knight f6, and it's white to move, and you're playing white. You want to think about how do I increase this advantage that you feel you have? But it's really not easy to do. And then you might come back around to think like, okay, maybe white's only up quarter of a pawn here. Or maybe it's actually equal. And if you think it's equal, then you might try to look for ways to just poke and prod at black or encourage them to make a mistake. Maybe you set up some trap that allows black or encourages black to make an error. But I think that's the issue here. It's pretty easy for black to simplify this. Knight d7, try to trade the knights, and then play c5 and trade off the advanced pawn. And black's pieces are all sitting pretty well. The king is sitting safe. Same for white. So Stockfish just looks ahead and sees this can all be liquidated. Really, there's no advantage for white here. But I think human versus human, we're on the right track. Okay, so let's talk about the plans for white. What should white try to do here in terms of concrete plans? Put your answers in the chat. What does white want to do here? We already talked about black's. So black wants to play knight d7, swap the knights, c5, swap the pawns. So we know that that's probably what black's going to do. And if they achieve their goals, it's equal. We've also kind of peeked behind the curtain and seen that black can achieve their goals with best play. But what do we want to do from the white side? F4, F5 break maybe. I see that answer. When I was going through creating these notes, one thing I was thinking is let's really try to press our space advantage. And the reason I say that is because if black doesn't, let's just say black doesn't go for those trades. Maybe they aren't aware that that's the best plan. I think increasing the space advantage is one way to encourage black to make more mistakes or to create more weaknesses in the black camp. Rook d1, hoist to the third rank. Okay, multiple rook lift options. Double the rooks on the e file, play f4. Play pawn to b4 to prevent c5. f4 looks tempting too. c4, c5. Nobody dares for g4. So this g4 is an idea that I had. I was thinking you could play h3 first. So let's just say black goes for kind of some strange strategy. And you get g4 in. And h4. I could see something like this creating a huge advantage for white. Now, there are some downsides to pushing these pawns, right? If black goes for their main plan and gets their trades in, it doesn't really make sense for us to open the king. But let's say you're playing a lower rated opponent or an equal opponent and you really want to push for the win here. I think this is a great plan because you're forcing black to find the best plan in response. And you're creating problems for black. This is already a 0.6 for white. So we made a couple mistakes for black by just pushing the A and B pawns, but this is a way that white could increase the advantage. I also really like this idea of B4 and A4 is a way to play for an advantage. So let's just say black kind of does something, oh, that falls for knight takes C6. See, perfect example. If black does something slow and we get all of this in, and let's say they just kind of sit back and wait, this space advantage is now leading to a 0.4 or a 0.5 eval because we're shutting down some of black's counterplay. There's no longer c5. And let's say they go knight d7, maybe we go knight back to d3, right? And now we have this more long-term strategic dance and we have the queen side locked down for black. So we're not making this as easy for them to simplify. After b4, the computer is saying knight d7 straight away. And if knight d3, a5. And that's a difficult move to find too. So the computer recognizes that black cannot allow white to just lock down the queen side, and you got to play a quick a5. Yeah, Zelda's saying black would need to fall asleep to let that happen. Right. All right, let's now do a course giveaway. Okay. So we're going to do one course giveaway today. And this, we did not ask for usernames in an email. So this is going to be based on what answer you put in the chat. It's a numeric answer. So it's like previously when we've done these, when it's a numeric answer, closest answer wins. And if you get it exact, then obviously you win. If you're the first person to get it exact. Otherwise, it's closest answer wins. Toby's sitting this one out. Okay, Toby has won 2 courses, I think, in 2 weeks. And Toby has decided to sit one out to give everyone a chance. I love it. Okay. ChessGoals uses the Thinkific platform for our courses. We recently did just hit a milestone for number of students. How many students are currently enrolled in the ChessGoals course platform? Clem put a 46 in the chat. Clem is counting up the number of ChessGoals courses and anticipating the question to get the first right answer. I like the effort, Clem. This includes all members. This is the number of ChessGoals students. Why is everyone guessing like 50 students? I think people were thinking I was gonna say number of courses. If you put a number of, if your number is under 100, you can guess again, or under 1,000 even. If you put under 1,000, guess again. How many ChessGoals students are there on the course platform? It's 4 digits. These answers are all over the place. That's why I was confused in the beginning. We had a 46, 76, 42, 90, 27. And then Steve came in with the first over 1,000 at 1,500. 88, 36, 400, 111. I think I know this one. 350, 329, 1,500, 7,500, 360, 1,800, 1,300, 3,500, 2,500, 57. Correction, 702, 43, 5,000. Okay, just want to make sure everyone has a chance. Okay, Colin's heading out to the Arsenal Tottenham game. Okay, are we ready for the answer? Coming in under the gun, Alexandru Vasai with a guess of 8,000. That is the closest. We just crossed the 8,000 threshold. So like on the website, if you go on our main page, it'll say over 7,500 students. Yep, Steve just mentioned that. The website says 7,500 plus. Every single person guessed low, which is kind of amazing. But it's 8,063. That's the current number of students, 8,063. So Alexandru, send me an email or message me on Discord. Let me know which course you want. And congrats on winning. Yeah, so many students. It's really kind of amazing to think back on it. Yeah, when Jesse and I first started ChessGoals, it was like a really small email list, and our courses were through WordPress in the very beginning. We just had study plans for sale as our first items for sale. Yeah, it's awesome. It's really rewarding working on ChessGoals. So thanks everyone for being students. Okay, let's go through one more position before we wrap up today, and at the end we can just sort of do a general Q&A. Position number 7. This one is black to move, so let's actually flip the board. Black to move. Tell me what the eval is, and optionally, if you want, put a short description. Thanks for the congrats, everyone. I didn't put that answer to, yeah, I wasn't like fishing for any compliments or anything, but thank you. Oh, wow. Alexandru made that estimate based on YouTube subscribers. Awesome. That was a really good guess. I feel like basing it on the 7,500 on the website was the way to go. You know, if you see 7,500 plus, and you hear me mention we just hit a new milestone, you could get to that 8,000 number maybe. Okay, but back to this position. What do we think the eval is? And if you would like to, put a short sentence as to why that's the eval. Okay, Steve is saying minus 1.5. Daniel, minus 1.5. Adam, ChessGoals is not a full-time job. Just something I do on the side. Aditya, minus 1.5. Rook's on the open file. Bishop's on good diagonals. This does remind me a bit of a Benko gambit with that bishop on g7 and rook on e8 pointing at the b2 pawn. Zelda, are you tracking the evals so that I can sit here and do nothing? Okay, minus 1 king safety and pawn structure. Waldez minus 1.7, piece activity, king safety. Dennis minus 1, Tobief minus 1.5, king safety activity, white 1 pawn more. Seems like my beloved Benko, Alexandria, is saying. Clem is saying 1.5 for white, I think, as black is still not developed. I think you're probably looking at the bishop on c8. Minus 1.5, minus 1. This actually, okay, I'm actually really interested in this. I wonder how much it matters in terms of what we think as humans the eval is, which side we're looking at on the bottom. Do we tend to always favor the side that we're playing? Because the last position, I guess I forgot to say it was black to move, but that didn't really affect the eval. We looked at it from white's point of view, and it looked like white had the advantage, but it was actually black. I think I'm thinking about this correctly. I'm curious if people are more likely to over-evaluate their side, or the side on the bottom if it's a 2D board. Julio's saying, interesting idea. Yes, my side is always better, LOL. Nice. Okay, we have the Zelda minus 1.4 average in the chat, GPT minus 0.9. So a couple people did favor white here, which is interesting. My bias is towards black. So white is up 1 point of material here. That's something that you want to always, not only do you want like a scoreboard of what the material is, you want that overall eval scoreboard, but don't forget to look at the material still. You might get caught up in all the factors, but make sure you still count the pieces. That should actually be the number one thing you do, as long as you have time. Count the number of pieces and the point values. So white is +1 on material here. In terms of king safety, I give the advantage to black. I'd say around half a pawn. This king is exposed. Piece activity, I would say -1 here. I really like this Fianchetto bishop. I've played the Benko many, many times, and I really enjoy Benko positions. So I'm a little bit biased, but I really kind of enjoy how active all these pieces are for black. I think the black position looks way more fun here than white's position. Space, I think space is about equal. White has this advanced pawn, but black has queenside space, looking at these rooks. Black kind of controls the queenside. So about equal. Pawn structure, I'm also going to say about equal. I see this protected pass pawn, which has a lot of value, but these are isolated pawns. This is a backward pawn. I think it sort of balances out. So really what it's boiling down to me, is we have the king safety for black and the piece activity for black. And I think I would say this is around a -1 to 1.5 for black. And you guys were right on track. You had a -1.4 Zelda average and a 0.9 GPT average. The eval is -0.69 according to Stockfish. And I think, Stockfish probably sees that black has all of these factors that outweigh the +1 of material. But it's also not saying that black is really close to that winning category. It can probably hold this position for white. So let's talk about now, what is the plan for black? Put those answers in the chat. So we know the factors. We know the eval, -0.7. What is the plan for black in this position? Because eval on its own doesn't help you a ton unless you know what to do with that eval. Yeah, I agree, Zelda. I think we got so wrapped up on all the other factors that we kind of forgot about material. I didn't realize the material until I read the notes. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Got to count those pawns. Okay, Zelda's saying rook a2 and then attacking c4. Replace the queen with a light piece. Oh, like put your knight there maybe on d6 for black. Knight h5 and bishop to d4. Trying to go after the dark squares around the white king. Attack b2 and f4. Play against b2. A lot of people are saying knight h5. Very good. So I'm looking at the top plans via Stockfish. And here's what it likes. The first line that it likes for black involves rook a2, bishop h6, and knight h5. So the bishop and knight are putting a triple attack on this weak pawn. And rook a2 is putting pressure on b2 and also pinning it down to the white queen. And what you're doing is you're overloading this bishop in a way, right? That bishop is trying to guard two weaknesses. You're trying to make it so that white cannot easily move their pieces, right? So when that bishop is trapped, that rook is also trapped, and that just ties down the white pieces. So you guys are exactly on the right tracks. We want to target f4, target b2, and we probably want to crash through on the queen side is the plan. Now, what does white want to do? Let's flip this board. So we know white is worse, 0.7. We also know white is up a pawn. So what does white want to do to create that counterplay to fight against black's plans? So we know that black has to do something active to fight back, right? If black doesn't do something active, the extra pawn, it being a pass pawn, that's probably enough for white to win in, let's say, a beginner game, right? If black just doesn't do anything actively. But if black goes for those plans we discussed, what does white want to do? Okay, I'm seeing knight f3 to e5, push for the f5 break. Give up the b pawn for the c pawn, and then push in the center. f5, b3, bishop b2. Yeah, I think f5 is a big one. I'm looking at the top Stockfish line. It actually likes putting the rook on f1 just to support f5. So taking the rook off an open file, knowing that we want to get this f5 break in and slow down some of black's attempts to attack our f-pawn. It also likes bishop to d2, followed by maybe bishop to c3, trying to counter that strong bishop. So we're taking a bad bishop of white's, trying to trade it for a good bishop of black's. And I don't know if you can easily get this in, but I really like that idea of playing for b4 to trade the c-pawn off. If you were able to just trade b-pawn for c-pawn, white's in extremely good shape. So for example, let's just say bishop to, we got to give black a move. Let's say we had something like this and black moves their queen. If we're able to get b4 in soon, I think that's a nice way for us to fight back in this position. It's not actually completely safe here yet, but I think putting the bishop on d2 could at least sort of prepare you for playing that b4 break and make sure that your opponent has to stay aware of that. But I think those are both kind of the two main plans. White should play for f5, b4, and black should try to target those exact two same pawns. So the position is all about pawn weaknesses, and white wants to fix the weaknesses, black wants to cement them and maybe win a pawn in addition to having all these other factors. All right, so that's the last position that I have for today. So we went through the slides in the beginning. We went through some examples. Any questions before we wrap up? So all of this content will be coming out in the upcoming intermediate strategy and planning course. It's going to be sort of our main recommendation for intermediates. And then I do plan to have a 2-course series. So it's going to be like the intermediate planning and strategy course. Then there's going to be one course that's a little bit higher level than that one that builds on the intermediate course. So that's going to be more of like advanced intermediates up to advanced players. I would say that one's like 1,700 to 2,000, whereas the first one's going to be probably 1,100 to 1,700. When's the book version of this coming out? Nice. Yes, you should write a book. Oh, I don't know about writing a book. That sounds like so much work. Zelda says, played any pickleball lately? I took yesterday off, but I'm playing tonight, Zelda. I almost wore a pickleball t-shirt today, but then I wasn't sure, if that's too much pickleball for a chess stream. I think it says, it says I can't with a period, and then it says I have pickleball with a period. That's the t-shirt. Why does the Caro-Kann always win? Great question. It's hard to beat it. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm planning on doing another live stream next weekend. Probably Sunday again. Daylight savings time ends in the US. I may do Saturday just for that reason, actually. Just to make the time zones easier for people to remember. Probably Saturday or Sunday next weekend. And I think the topic is going to be pawn structures. So I think we're going to stay on this sort of middle game strategy theme. It'll keep me motivated to working on this intermediate planning and strategy course. And I think we will focus on going through some games involving pawn structures next weekend. Good night, Tanya. Thanks for watching. Okay, question. Do you think most blunders come from wrong eval? I think, Luca, that's a great question. Azel and I just recorded for a video for YouTube that'll be coming out soon. He authored the blunder course for ChessGoals. It's a really good course because it talks about all the reasons why people blunder. So I think lack of eval is one of them, but there's a lot of other factors. Oh, I didn't even realize that. DST ended in Europe last night. Scandinavian is a good sister course for the Caro-Kann, Clem. I think they have a lot of similarities. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for your nice note. Peter, I don't have any OTB tournaments planned yet. There is a tournament coming to Rochester. It's called the Class Tournament. I don't plan on playing in it, though. I think I'll just go watch some or maybe help out. Matt saying, thanks for the session. Although, can someone help me find this Caro always wins universe? Nice. Today I learned Europe also recognizes daylight savings time. Yeah, I wasn't sure which countries, is it all of Europe that recognizes daylight savings? I feel like that's a good trivia question. There's probably a handful of countries that don't. No, there's a very small chance I go to DC for the World Open. Okay, so Waldez said Sunday. Quick poll for the chat. Do you prefer Saturday or Sunday around this time next weekend, if you had to pick? Okay, 2 Sundays. Sunday. This is going back to that thing, I think, where I ask, I asked 11 or 10 a.m. that one day, And it was an 11 a.m. class, and everyone said 11. So now I'm asking Saturday or Sunday for a Sunday class, and everyone's saying Sunday. It's funny. Um, Dennis, how would you answer Clem's question? I don't know. Is Rochester Democrats or Republican? Our state as a whole has been voting Democrat. And it's kind of like most states where the larger cities tend to vote Democrat, and we have a lot of rural areas and they tend to vote Republican. But Rochester is not like a super huge city. Dennis is saying Dems now, historically Republican. Okay. Sundays are great. Sampling bias is real. Yes. All right. Well, maybe we will do Sunday and I will try to be very accurate on how I describe the times. Oh, UK soccer matches. Julio says Saturday people are not here now. All right. Thanks, Zelda. I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Stay tuned to your emails. That's where I'll be posting, or in Discord. If you're not in our Discord server, check it out. Link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Like the video. Tell your friends about ChessGoals. That's actually the #1 thing you can do. If you like the classes, let your friends know. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.